Hello, this is a continuation of my series of videos on Alistair Parker's Short History of the Second World War, this one dealing with the Battle of Britain and the Blitz. This section is in his third chapter, and this is the second of the videos I'm making on that chapter. Everyone agreed that an essential precondition for a successful German invasion of Britain would be for the Luftwaffe to defeat the Royal Air Force and so win air superiority over the English Channel. After that, German bombers would be able to attack British warships, which otherwise would interfere with the landings, without interference from British fighters. So, in order to wear down RAF Fighter Command, German bombers would make daylight attacks on important targets, which the RAF would be compelled to defend. German fighters would then attack the RAF fighters and engage them in direct struggle. This policy was initiated towards the end of July 1940. At that point, the Germans had about 900 long-range bombers and over 1,000 fighters, most being single-seat fighters, with twin-engined fighters and dive bombers in addition. By comparison, the RAF only had about 600 single-seat fighters. The RAF had fewer planes, and in addition, as the defender, were not able to choose the area for each day's area of conflict. That was chosen by the area that the Germans chose to attack. On the other hand, the RAF was fighting over British soil or accessible parts of the Channel, so any British pilot who had to bail out and survived had a good chance of getting back to his unit and returning to action. By contrast, German pilots who bailed out and didn't drown were likely to become prisoners. And as a footnote, not in the book, about 20% of the quotes British pilots were actually not British, but included a whole range of nationalities, including Poles, New Zealanders, Canadians, Czechs, Irish, Australians, and the rest that you see there. Another British advantage was that they had a well-integrated system of fighter control, with a chain of radar stations supplemented by observer posts able to report approaching aircraft to fighter command and sector stations. As to aircraft, the German single-seaters were mostly Messerschmitt 109s, and against them were British Hurricanes and Spitfires. The Messerschmitts were able to climb at a higher rate than the Hurricanes or Spitfires, but were less maneuverable, except in dives when the British planes' float carburetors cut out. The Messerschmitts were better at high altitudes until the Hurricanes and Spitfires were equipped with new three-bladed propellers in early August 1940. Over time, the air battle changed. It continued from July through to September 1940. Fortunes varied, the Germans changing their targets and the number of their bombers. The German bombers initially focused on British shipping, then British airfields and aircraft factories, almost destroying the British sector system in the southeast region, which was most vulnerable, as well as British control over the Straits of Dover. And finally switched their focus to bombing London, thinking that that might end the war and thus make an invasion unnecessary. That proved not to be the case. The British strong response forced the German fighters to concentrate on defending their bombers, but in late August they reduced the number of bombers so that they could focus more effectively on the British fighters. This was the most dangerous period for the British. But, overestimating their success, the Germans then thought that they had destroyed British air power in the southeast of England and switched to targets further inland and sought to draw out the RAF from its inland bases by attacking London. Both sides lost planes and aircrew, and the success depended on how rapidly these could be replaced. With the newly created Ministry of Aircraft Production in Britain under Lord Beaverbrook, the British were able to produce more aircraft than had been destroyed, but the loss of skilled pilots meant that less experienced men were increasingly employed. Overall, however, German losses greatly exceeded British. Between the 10th of July and the 31st of October, British Fighter Command lost 792 aircraft, whilst the Luftwaffe lost 1,389. That's over almost 600 more than the British. By September, German losses of aircraft were so severe that on the 17th of September, Hitler postponed his proposed invasion of Britain. The invasion was postponed again in September and in spring 1941, and thereafter was never revived. In terms of loss of manpower, Parker doesn't give the German losses, but for the British, of 2,945 RAF personnel involved in the battle, 507 were killed and about 500 wounded. So together that's about a third of the men. Thus, Churchill's famous remark after the invasion threat receded, "Never in the field of human conflict has so much been owed by so many to so few." Now let's talk about the Blitz, which is the name Londoners gave to the German air attacks on cities. Starting in July, the Germans began experimental night bombing of British cities. This campaign intensified from late August, with 4 large-scale attacks on Liverpool and later attacks on the ports of Swansea and Bristol. Then, from the 7th of September, large-scale bombing attacks were made on London, continuing for the next 68 nights. From early November, 16 industrial centres across Britain were also targeted, the largest attack being on the 14th of November against Coventry, in which 450 German aircraft took part. The advantages of nighttime bombing at this stage in the war was primarily that air defences were very weak, so that relatively few aircraft were lost to British counterattacks. For example, in the initial 4 attacks on Liverpool, each of which involved about 160 German bombers, only 7 bombers were lost. The main disadvantage of night attacks was the inaccuracy of the bombing. German commanders had aimed to destroy strategic targets like the docks, but most bombs missed and hit commercial or residential areas instead, thus becoming terror bombing. German inaccuracy was later increased when the British were able to successfully interfere with their navigational guidance systems, causing German bombers to release their loads miles from the intended targets, often open countryside. Pre-war British governments had feared that air attacks such as those launched against British cities would lead to a widespread panic and flight, particularly from London, but this didn't happen, and civilian morale wasn't broken. From November 1940 until mid-1941, when German attention was switched to the Eastern Front, over 20,000 tons of high explosive were dropped on Britain, together with 80,000 canisters of incendiary bombs. Overall, throughout the bombing campaign, German bombing of British cities killed about 42,000 people and seriously injured at least 50,000. Although it slowed down the production of aero engines as a result of a successful raid on a component factory, it didn't check war production, however. These are photographs from the Blitz. This is central London from the roof of St. Paul's after a night of heavy bombing, particularly iconic photograph. These are some of the defense measures that were taken with barrage balloons, anti-aircraft searchlights, and anti-aircraft guns. This is Liverpool city centre after heavy bombing. These are children in London's East End made homeless by bombing. These are some people looking happy to have survived, I guess, salvaging possessions from their bombed out house. And these are office workers on their way to work as they go through the rubble. And one of the things in London was that tube stations, particularly Aldwych, was used as a bomb shelter uh, as a response to the Blitz. So that's all I want to tell you for the moment. And thank you for listening. And particular thanks to my patrons for their kind support and encouragement. Without them, I wouldn't be able to make these videos. Next week, we'll talk about the War of the Atlantic. And in the meantime, please do like, comment, and share on the videos. Subscribe if you want to be notified of future videos, and I'll give Patreon and PayPal links below if you want to provide practical support. Have a good day.